Hey everybody, Edo here, and today I want to provide some perspective and room for discussion around reviews and paid reviews. It's a hot button topic, and in particular in board games and Kickstarter, but it's a hot button topic, and I even put out sort of a question to both the board game review community, which I'm part of, as well as the Kickstarter creator community around the fact that more and more reviewers are asking for some sort of payment. As sometimes it's as little as $50, sometimes 100, sometimes up to 400 or more for reviewed content or previewed content, or how, I mean, there's all different words and things around it, but that's the general conversation. And I started both of these threads in different categories, not leading the witness, just, hey, this seems to be happening. What are your thoughts? And honestly, had great dialogue in both threads, all sorts of perspectives. And I wanted to sort of collapse it a little bit into this video. But for me, this is really about just us talking about it as an industry, as people involved, as a group. Look, everyone has different perspectives. They always do. But, you know, we're all on the same side. We all love games. We're one community. And in fact, it's a synergy between these Kickstarter creators and the reviewers and publishers, and we're all the boats are rising together. And how we handle this, how we handle it from a B2B creator to reviewer perspective, and how we handle it to the end user, the customer, the player perspective, it's really important. It's really important when you think about integrity, and it's really important when you think about business relationship and industry. So the purpose of this one, these other another perspective videos, it depends on what I'm talking about. But for this one, for me, I just really want to talk about it a little bit, and for everyone to sort of consider the other side. Consider what the perspective of the Kickstarter creator is, what the perspective of the end user might be, or the player, and what the perspective of the reviewer is. Because it's really important, and there's a lot of good perspectives, all right? And I even have notes. I'm going to be looking, because I've been thinking about it and listening and like opening up and being willing to understand how and why somebody feels the way they do without throwing stones at them, right? Everyone comes from a different place. But we all love games, right? Right? We're here because we all love games. And for the most part, most people are not making tons of money at it, right? Different people, different services. That's not to say people shouldn't, their time isn't valuable, but we're all, for the most part, here because this is a hobby and an industry we love, okay? So one of the underpinnings to this whole thing, from my perspective, comes from the change in reviewers and reviewers in culture. So, and I'm not a historian. I don't do a lot of research on these videos, but if you think about what a review used to be in terms of when it was part of the New York Times or a magazine or IGN or any of these, news platforms, reviews were pundits. They were people who were experts in the field, who were most often paid by the platform that they were on, and then the audience subscribed to the platform, and the platform paid the salary of these people, so they were impartial reviews. And you still see that in lots of places. And I'm not to say there weren't any other categories, but I think culturally in the United States, I can't speak for everywhere, but culturally there's this important piece of it from a individual perspective of reviews are meant to be impartial. They're subjective, but impartial. And they're not, they're not paid for, and they're not bought, and that kind of thing. That's like cultural fabric stuff. And you saw it a lot during a lot of the sort of scandals on the board game side. Video game side, I don't want to get into those at all. But that perception is important, and it's one of those things that holds everything up, right? People feeling that they're getting honest assessments when they're making a decision for purchasing or playing is a big deal. But with the introduction of YouTube and all these other channels, suddenly reviewers are starting to come from everywhere. Anyone can be a reviewer, and people can get good at it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they don't have a sponsor, and that is to say, they're not working working for anyone. So suddenly that conversation of like, well, I really want to do reviews, but how am I going to make money emerges. And reviewers move from pure pundits to content creators and creatives. And that's a shift that changes the dynamic. Suddenly, they're building their own audience, and they have an audience, and it's their network. It's not the New York Times. And that shifting business model, that shifting of who's doing it, how they're becoming influential over the last decade is part of this conversation. The other part of this conversation is Kickstarter and independent publishers. Suddenly, on that side, you have people who aren't these big companies that can fund their own thing and have big business, but smaller entities, individuals who are trying to get a Kickstarter and looking for a review. And this is sort of this new business model there, where you're not sitting on marketing budgets. You're not sitting on the ability to have clout to just send out your games. You don't even have a finished game. So that's a totally different dynamic than, again, I'm going to film a little bit, but like movie company having a screening so reviewers can see it, right? Like you're in a totally different dynamic. And that, I think, is the most important part of this conversation. Just recognizing that what we have culturally thought of a reviewer in the YouTube world is different. And what we're sort of thinking of as a board game publisher in the Kickstarter world is different. That's the sort of the source of the tension. Along those lines, in particular on Kickstarter, is this idea that to be successful on Kickstarter today, it's almost a requirement. I'd argue it is, but I mean, that you have reviews on your page. You don't look like a game that's been thought through, finished, and is ready for Kickstarter if it doesn't have a bona fide review. So suddenly, a review is a requirement. It's not I'm making this game and I'm marketing and people are going to review it and hopefully it goes well. It's you can't do this unless you have that. So suddenly there's this new dynamic and market driver in it. You have to get a review. You cannot launch without a review. Whoa, that's a big deal. And honestly, as a Kickstarter creator, like I'm going to bounce around because I do both. And by the, I normally think of myself as a game maker. Like that's how I sort of identify. But practically speaking, I've done over 300 game reviews. Like I create all these League of Game Makers and sort of industry videos. I'm a content creator. I'm both. So I'm going to bounce between them. But so on the Kickstarter creator side, the reality is I don't want, a lot of reviewers feel like when somebody says, I don't want to pay for a review, I'm saying, or whoever, I don't want to pay, or they don't want to pay for that content creator's time. That's not it. I mean, perhaps it is in some cases, but that's not where it comes from, I think, in most cases. The reality is, as a content creator, or as a Kickstarter guy, I don't want to pay for reviews because I want to provide impartial content to my potential backers, right? I'm not looking for shill. I'm not interested in in the context of a review. We'll talk about content marketing in a second because there is value there. But in the context of the gate of a review on a Kickstarter, I just want to be able to send it to somebody so they play it, they give their opinion. I certainly usually think it's a good game. I hope they do. But I'm not interested in anything else. All I need as a Kickstarter creator is 2 or 3 reviews from somebody anybody has heard about the game, because otherwise there's a stronger likelihood my Kickstarter is going to fail and my dream's not going to come true, right? Now, on a reviewer side, be like, well, great, but that's fine, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't get paid. That doesn't mean I shouldn't be compensated for my time. That doesn't mean you're not leveraging my audience. Those arguments are all true, but I just think it's important to understand that when a creator's like, part of not wanting to pay is you're not looking for that. You're just looking for somebody willing to play and speak to the merits of your game, because you don't want to lead the witness. You just want them to know about the game and know that it's been reviewed by a third party. This is very different than how to play videos. This is very different than overview videos. This is very different than, your like intro video. Those are all things I should have. I probably can do on my own, but it might be better if I pay somebody who's a content creator who knows how to make great videos. Then it's a service. But there's this big gap where, but for the reviews, you want that to be impartial. Now, oftentimes the best solution here is you do a little bit of both because of the content marketing aspect of it. But I just want the reviewer side to appreciate that it's because it's this requirement, and it's because culturally you're not looking for somebody to sing your praise. I mean, you want that to happen, but you're really genuinely just hoping somebody can review your game. So that's sort of on the Kickstarter creator side. Okay, so then on the reviewer side, look, and hey, Kickstarter creators, reviews and video reviews, it takes time. We gotta look at your game. We gotta read through your half-baked rules. We gotta play it a bunch of times. We're, hopefully a number of times. We gotta play it with different groups of people. We gotta figure out what we're gonna say. I don't do tons of editing, but lots of people do it. You got to edit. You got to post. It takes a lot of time. So I think that's where it starts having an impact, right? And then part of that, and obviously there's equipment costs, and and then because of the space where these Kickstarter creators are also now have audiences, they've also built the audience. And so I really think there's this interesting shift when it's no longer a job, when it's not paid work, when it's not somebody who's impartial because their time is being compensated. They're a New York Times reviewer, or a blogger, or somebody who's selling their content to the platform. Huffington Post being not the best example, but some other platform that's paying per word, paying for the video, giving ad revenue. When it's the creator, to me, there's now this dynamic where it's creative work. It's a creative, and then you get into the graphic designer, artist. Why are you trying to get me to work for free for exposure conversation? My time's worth money. My time. Why do you think you should be able to get my time for free? I'm better than that. And this is just the shifting market. When you think of a reviewer as somebody who's paid for by a platform and providing a service to the platform's audience, you don't have that conversation. But when this is an independent creative creating their YouTube channel and doing this stuff, they're artists. It's artistry. And I don't want to say that the reviewers are an artist. I'm trying not to, but I think there's a unique and genuine shift when that happens. And I think that adds to that tension, right? That adds to that tension. And, I think from an end user perspective, for the most part, people have different feelings, but they just, at minimum, want to know. At minimum, would like for it to be clear this was content that was compensated. This is sponsored content. You could say I received a copy of the game, but once it's paid for and paid for in a big way, I think there's some expectation for that. Now, look, as a reviewer, I do reviews for free. I feel like it's one thing that it's part of my whole picture, and I'm not trying to become a reviewer like as my core, is my thing and like my livelihood. But also, I sort of come from that traditional sort of impartiality bit. But there's lots of different ways that people are trying to work out. Sometimes the money is spent, and it's paid for the time in the review. Sometimes it's a submission fee, so it's detached. You're not paying for the review; you're paying for the submission. Sometimes some groups are in the bigger, when the numbers are bigger, they're adding in promotion and banners on Facebook and ads, right? And that's when it becomes content marketing, and it's this interesting shift. Because, so let's say for a second, as a Kickstarter creator, I've solved the reviewer piece. I have 2 or 3 reviews. And, sorry, I'm a little all over the place, but also there's this tension around service, but I'll talk about that. But I have 2 or 3 reviews. Now, once I have those reviews, I've crossed the hurdle. It's no longer about having a review on my page. I have a review on my page. I don't need to worry about it anymore. Beyond that gate, now it's about audiences. Now it's marketing. Now it's ad dollars. When a reviewer or a platform is asking for $100, $50, $100, $200, whatever, for a review or this, that, suddenly, I'm not thinking about that like, that's my marketing budget. That's where that money comes from. It's content marketing. There's nothing wrong with content marketing. Content marketing is fantastic. It's valuable. But as a creator, you're thrust into that category. And as an indie small guy, that's a ton of money. Hey, indie small guys, when it comes to that kind of thing, it suddenly comes down to ROI. That's when they start thinking about video production quality. That's when they start thinking about what size audience does this Kickstarter, does this reviewer content creator have? Because if you're going to spend $400 on a review, or $200 or $300, you want to know that there's a return, and you shouldn't be thinking about $250, let's say $400 on a review generating $400 on your Kickstarter, right? That's a loss, because your Kickstarter value, 10% for Kickstarter, cost of goods, marketing, well, you maybe don't include marketing, cost of goods, shipping, right? So let's say you're selling your game and you only make $10 at the end of the day. That might mean that the $400 needs to produce $1,600 in backing, or like 40 pledges or 50 pledges. I mean, the math is your own math, but you really need to be thinking about that return as you're spending this money. You think about it in the same way as you think about putting up a banner on the board game group, right? Like, or Board Game Geek, or a contest, or a website. You're just like, if I put this money, I don't have much money. If I put this money here, is it going to benefit me? And that's the shift. So again, this is why I want, it's so complicated. It's so complicated because of the changing on the reviewer side and the changing on the Kickstarter side. So then back to the reviewer side, right? Like, as a creator, you're building your channel. You're hoping for the day where you can do this full time because it's your passion and you love, right? So how are you growing your channel? And how are you dealing with both your growing channel and then filtering out the noise? Another thing is, hey, Kickstarter creators, I get asks constantly for reviews. The bigger you are, and I'm not big, I'm small. I'm not tiny, but I'm small. But the bigger you are, the more and more Kickstarter creators ask you. It's literally an impossible amount of work. There are days when I get 6 Kickstarter creator requests. I've watched 4 videos on the same day for different Kickstarters. It's constant. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. You can't. So, from a creator perspective, one benefit of a cost, one benefit of, hey, it's going to cost you $50, $100, $200, is filtering out the noise, saying, you got to really want it. I'm not going to, there's too many other people to deal with this. So that's one side of it. There's paying for the effort. Another part of it, right, is growing your channel. So one of the reasons, early on, you get a lot of reviewers who have smaller channels who might be willing to do more, sort of ad hoc reviews, but they don't have the audience, right? So then it's sort of a catch-22 as you're building. One of the values from Kickstarter reviews for an audience, from an audience perspective, is a Kickstarter runs for 30 days, and whoever the creator is investing into that will run. So if you have a video on a Kickstarter, it gets a lot of exposure and continued exposure compared to a video of some published game. At that point, you're just sort of in the wind. But at least on a Kickstarter, it's got some regular exposure. I find that Kickstarter games often have lots of views. It depends on where you sit on the page and how many reviews there are. So there's some of that going on. And the other thing is on the, once it becomes content marketing and you're paying for it, you get into some interesting places, right? And this stretches down to tutorial videos and intro videos. So one, as a reviewer, you're now providing a professional service. You're accepting money. The Kickstarter guys are becoming companies. They're going to want an invoice, right? There are lots of horror stories, some of which I've experienced, of paid reviews not coming in. Nothing is worth, for a creator paying for a review, part of that is sort of the peace of mind that it's going to be there. Okay, well, I just, I don't have any leverage over, you're using the term leverage, right? When I reach out to a normal reviewer, somebody sends me a prototype for me as a reviewer, and I commit to a date or what, maybe I'll review it, maybe I won't. You're not paying me. I might have things, I might get busy, so I might not get to your game. And you only have 4 or 5 prototypes, so to some degree, the value perception around paid is around, hey, if it's worth $50 to me, it's worth $100 to me to know what's going to happen. And the worst is when you pay and it doesn't happen. Sort of ridiculous, right? So those are challenging scenarios, and they're hard to work through. So this is the complexity. Ownership's another conversation. If you do a how to play video and it's you doing content, I send you the game, but you're doing it as part of your own channel, presumably that's yours. But then if you're I'm going to pay you for the how to play video, well, is it yours or is it mine? Right? What if I want the video? What if I want to put it? When I work, on my videos, when they have an animated sequence, like Legendary Creatures, Ben Schulman did this great front-end little animated thing. I pay him for that, and I get the file, and I put, he's providing me this service and this unit. But it's a little different when it's a how to play, but you want to keep it on your channel. It just gets weird. And so as an industry, I think we need to be talking about this and figuring out, I don't think standards make sense, but just a way to understand and work through it, because I feel like if we play this wrong, it just gets more and more expensive as people say, oh, people are charging $400, well, I'll charge. But at the same time, if everyone stops paying, it's going to change as well, because the reality is the reviewers need the content too. People want to see reviewers talk about Kickstarters to make judgment. It's a huge growing platform. There's this demand for all parts. So we all should figure out a way to make it all happen and provide that impartiality, but also make it so that content creators are gaining value and are able to continue doing their business. So what now? What can be done? Certainly on the creator side, I'm this is the reality of the world you live in today, folks. So, think about reviewers well in advance. Probably consider having more prototypes to give you a little bit more flexibility, but think hard about what the return is and how you talk about or show that kind of content on your Kickstarter page. I also will say, if you're frustrated about not being able to get a reviewer to look at your thing, I would highly recommend being engaged in the community, being involved, talking with people, going to conventions, meeting reviewers, saying nice things, watching their videos, subscribing. I can't emphasize enough that having, a little rapport, a little engagement where the person sort of aware of your game, they've seen it, they know it's coming up, you've mentioned it a few times. That conversation to get on that reviewer's calendar, so to speak, in the non-paying way, is much better. If you send me a Dear John where you don't even use my name in the request, I don't respond. I close it. I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, at least have some that extra personal bit goes a long way. So think about that. The other piece of it is on the reviewer side, right? So there you can do a Kickstarter campaign. How can we fund this creative content? Well, board game industry isn't really big enough that all of these creators can make ad revenue. We are so much smaller in volume that ad revenue isn't going to solve this in a meaningful way. It might be nice, but very few board game reviewers are going to be able to handle this through ad revenue or ad revenue at all. So that's a challenge, right? Now, perhaps there's some platform opportunities where maybe Kickstarter takes some of that revenue and says, "Hey, we want to start supporting reviews on our platform, like a newspaper might." That might be okay. Though you might argue there's an incentive for good reviews in that case, right? You can see broader media conglomerates. There's also Patreons and Kickstarter campaigns like Rahdo, Dice Tower, Watch It Played, and you can build from those campaigns. Mind you, though, you do a Kickstarter, are you double dipping? Are you also charging you're charging the basically the community? Like, the idea that the gamer community would both fund the content creators and the game creators, like, might work, but seems a little heavy weight on the end user. But I don't know. But if you're doing a campaign, a Patreon, charging the creators and doing ads, right? Like, at some point it gets tough. But or you can find sponsors. The Dice Tower gets a lot of flack for cool stuff sponsoring them. They're probably the closest. I mean, I know they're one of the closest to this sort of impartial model, right? Where they get games, sure, but they're not. Other people have different opinions, but I watch a ton of that stuff. I don't feel they're in anyone's pocket, right? But they have sponsorship and they have other things that help make it happen, help pay for it. When it's not just literally the company paying them to do it, right, and making it content marketing. So perhaps that's perhaps sponsorship's a way to go from some of those companies. It's a conundrum. Interestingly, last thing, I know this has sort of been winded, is Martin, what is it? Board Game Exposure, I think it's called. This is interesting because it's a group that basically says, "Hey, if you send us your Kickstarter game or your game to the UK, we'll review it for free, but we'll get it to 4 or 5 other UK reviewers to review it for free." Well, what's going on here? Why is that market so different from the United States that not only are they doing it for free, but they're actively collaborating? I almost said colluding. That's not. They're grouping to increase the value. Well, the answer to that question is when you only have answer to that question is when you only have so many prototype copies and you're trying to get reviews. The idea that you're going to, and this is sort of US, the idea that you're going to send it overseas, which is expensive, to get an international review, it's even more expensive to get it back. And those markets are harder to serve if you're US based than anything else. So it's sort of like between a reviewer from the States and a reviewer in Europe, if the volume of my sales are in the States, and there's always a challenge and some problematic for servicing European consumers, I'm probably going to choose to say, well, maybe when the game comes out at retail, I'll get you one. Maybe I'm gonna, I've got enough reviewers asking for it over here. I'm not going to go out over there. So, but when you say, well, look, if you send us a copy, because we want to build our channels, we want to be part of this scene, and we are not getting sent copies. If we bring together a group, what if we told you, you send us one copy, we'll find 5 reviews for you? Well, that's a big deal. That's suddenly a conversation. And I'm only bringing it up because of how different it is. On one side, it's getting more gate. On the other side, they're like, please, please, please send us your game. We'll pass it around for you. So being a reviewer has changed. A reviewer on YouTube is a creative, is a content creator, has an audience, needs to think about their audience, needs to grow their personality and perspective. That all takes time and effort, and there's a deluge of games and people demanding them. And when you're getting demanded and harassed for something, it's hard not to say, well, I need to do something about this. I need my time to be compensated for, and I want to do that. It's not the purest of sort of, reviewers need to be impartial, but it's the reality of that business as it is today. On the creator side, there's this real wall, there's a limited budget, and there's a unique and preferred desire for impartiality because of why it needs to be there as a review. And both sides love games and are working hard and trying to get this all to happen. So there's no solution. I don't know the answer to this, but I think everyone should just understand the dynamics on both sides. And if I miss something, add it. Add the comments. Tag me. Whatever. My perspective is my perspective. Paying attention to the industry, involved in Kickstarters, have a content. Again, my channel is not big, and not. I like to think it's sort of professional, but not like a. I'm not that deep into content creation. There are other people like James Hudson, Board Game Spotlight, that's killing it and generating tons of value. And that's the other. It's sort of like on the content creator side. It's like if I'm generating all this value, you're talking to me because you want part of this value, right? Once you get past that reviewer, that first couple reviewers, then X person wants you to review it to get your audience. And if you're like you're trying to get my time and my audience, that's where that I should be compensated for it. And it's just weird because as a gamer, there's previews and overviews and things like that, but you want to believe when somebody says this game was great or this game was fun or we enjoyed it, they mean it. And that's the challenge. Everyone is making this industry better. I think the Kickstarter scene is incredible. I think the reviewer content is incredible. I try to see what everyone's doing. There's so much imagination and creativity going on. We don't want to stifle each other. We want to figure out a way to be massively successful, make great games, make this our livelihood, do awesome stuff, right? So I hope everyone's wonderful. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.